What are you doing right now? Maybe you're on a long drive, the road stretching out ahead. Or perhaps you're just settling in for the night, seeking a moment of quiet. If you're in the mood for a story, one that might just change the way you see the world, then stay with me. Have you ever noticed that the loudest rooms are often the most silent? Not silent in sound, but silent in connection. In the heart of Atlanta, on the 65th floor of a tower of glass and steel that scraped the sky, Donovan Sterling commanded a world of noise. The staccato rhythm of billion-dollar deals, the chorus of "Yes, sir," the roar of a private jet engine, this was the soundtrack of his power. He was a titan of real estate, a man who could raise a skyscraper from dust with a single phone call. But tonight, that man was a ghost. He was sitting in a crimson velvet booth at the Gilded Cypress, a restaurant so exclusive the air itself seemed to cost money. Across from him sat his 9-year-old son, Leo, and between them was a silence louder than any boardroom battle. The boy's untouched plate of sea bass, a dish that cost more than some people's weekly groceries, was growing cold. Leo was rocking a gentle rhythmic motion that was his only defense against a world that was too bright, too loud, too much. His hands were pressed firmly over his ears, and his eyes were fixed on the chaotic dance of light reflecting off a silver fork. Donovan felt the familiar hot sting of shame. He could feel the sideways glances from the other patrons, their whispers like 1,000 tiny needles. "Look at that man," they seemed to say. "He can own the city, but he can't even control his own child." Inside his head, the CEO was at war with the father. The CEO's voice was cold, sharp, and strategic. Assess the situation. Identify the liability. The boy is a liability. This is a PR nightmare. But the father's voice, a voice he barely recognized, was just a raw, desperate whisper. "Just look at me, Leo. Just once. Let me in." He had spent his life mastering the language of leverage and hostile takeovers, but here with his own son, he was a foreigner with no translator. The skills that had built his empire were useless in the quiet, fragile landscape of his son's heart. It was just that morning, not even 12 hours ago, that Donovan had sat at the head of a gleaming mahogany table. He had stared down a rival CEO, a man twice his age, and with a few surgically precise words, he had dismantled the man's company and absorbed it into his own. He had felt the surge of victory, the icy thrill of absolute control. Now, sitting in this restaurant, that control felt like a distant dream. The man who could command skylines couldn't even bridge the 3 feet of space between himself and his son. Power in one world, he was learning, can be complete powerlessness in another. And then, through the opulent chaos of the restaurant, he saw a shift. A change in the atmosphere. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was a presence. A waitress named Ilara Vance was moving between the tables. She didn't just walk. She seemed to glide a small island of calm in a sea of frantic energy. And as she drew closer, Donovan noticed something strange. She wasn't looking at him, the titan in the $1,000 suit. She wasn't looking at the judgmental eyes of the other diners. Her gaze was fixed with an almost impossible gentleness on Leo. She wasn't looking at a problem to be managed. She was looking at a person to be understood. And in that moment, Donovan Sterling, the man who had everything, had no idea he was about to witness a power far greater than his own, a power that wouldn't be found on a balance sheet, but in the simple, quiet hum that was about to break the silence. Donovan Sterling watched his breath caught somewhere in his chest as Ilara knelt. She didn't speak a single word to him or to his son. The world of noise, of clattering plates and pretentious laughter simply fell away. There was only the small sacred space she created beside Leo's chair. And then she began to hum. It wasn't a tune he recognized. It was a low, steady, resonant sound, almost like a vibration you could feel in your bones. It was the sound of calm itself. She made no move to touch Leo. She didn't ask him to look at her. She just hummed, her eyes soft, her presence a gentle question instead of a demand. And the impossible happened. Slowly, like a tide turning, Leo's rocking began to subside. His small hands, which had been clamped over his ears like a vice, slowly lowered. His eyes, which had been locked on the dizzying reflection of a fork, flickered, then shifted, and finally rested on her face. For the first time all night, the boy's world seemed to grow still. Ilara gently picked up a small piece of sea bass with her fingers, the very food he had refused, and held it out in her open palm. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, Leo leaned forward, and he ate. Donovan stared, his heart hammering against his ribs. The teams of specialists, the $500 an hour therapists, the doctors with their clipboards and empty promises, all of them had failed. Yet this woman with nothing but a quiet melody had just walked through a door that he believed was welded shut. Now, what Donovan saw as a miracle was actually a masterclass in a language he didn't know existed. It wasn't magic. It was expertise in its purest form. You see, Ilara understood something profound. Leo wasn't being difficult. He was being overwhelmed. His senses were under attack. That steady, low-frequency hum she created acted like a sonic shield, giving his nervous system a single predictable sound to focus on blocking out the chaos of the restaurant. And here's the mistake that so many of us with the best of intentions often make. We try to fight silence with noise. We use loud words, direct commands, and demand eye contact, believing that's how you break through. But for a child like Leo, that's not connection. That's an invasion. Ilara did the opposite. By kneeling, she made herself smaller, less threatening. By not demanding his gaze, she gave him the freedom to offer it. Her actions were a quiet testament to the work of real-world pioneers who taught us that the neurodivergent mind isn't broken, it simply operates on a different, often more sensitive frequency. Connection, she knew, is a key, not a battering ram. The softest whispers can break through the thickest walls of silence. As Ilara stood and gave him a simple, respectful nod before walking away, Donovan Sterling felt a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a child: hope. A terrifying, electrifying sliver of hope. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at the only person on earth who held the key to his son. And a man like Donovan, when he finds a key to a priceless treasure, doesn't just let it walk away. He begins a pilgrimage. That single miraculous bite of food was not an ending. It was the beginning of a ritual. Donovan Sterling, a man whose schedule was usually a fortress of ironclad appointments, now had only one unbreakable meeting each day. At 6 p.m. sharp, he and Leo would arrive at the Gilded Cypress and take their usual booth. It became a silent, holy pilgrimage. Night after night, Donovan watched Ilara. He studied her the way he once studied stock market trends, with a desperate, obsessive focus. He saw how she never approached Leo from behind, how she always announced her presence with that same soft hum. He noticed she would sometimes subtly move a vase or a candle, reducing the visual clutter around his son. She was a conductor, and Leo's senses were her orchestra. She wasn't just calming him, she was teaching him, and in turn, she was teaching Donovan. The titan of industry became a humble student. He went to a bookstore, a place he hadn't set foot in for 20 years, and bought a thick academic book on sensory processing disorder. Late at night, in the sterile silence of his penthouse, he would read the complex medical jargon swimming before his eyes. He even tried to replicate Ilara's hum for Leo at home. The sound that came from his throat was awkward, clumsy, a pale imitation of her effortless calm, but he kept trying. For the first time, he was putting in the work, not just writing a check. He was learning that the path to his son was not through power, but through patience. But in a city like Atlanta, a man like Donovan Sterling cannot have a secret ritual. The pilgrimage did not go unnoticed. First, it was a whisper in a gossip column, real estate mogul's nightly dinner with a mystery woman, and his reclusive son. Then came a blurry photograph splashed across a tabloid website. The cause, his public desperation, had a devastating effect. The photo found its way to the one person who knew how to weaponize his vulnerability, his ex-wife, Victoria Sterling. The phone call came on a Tuesday night, after a particularly good evening, where Leo had made eye contact for a full 5 seconds. Victoria's voice was like chips of ice in a crystal glass. "I saw the pictures, Donovan," she said, devoid of warmth. "A judge is not going to look kindly on you entrusting our son's care to a servant. I'm filing for sole custody. For Leo's own good, of course." Donovan felt the floor drop out from under him. She wasn't concerned for Leo. She was smelling blood in the water. She saw a PR vulnerability, a chance to reopen their divorce settlement and bleed him dry. She was turning his greatest act of love and desperation into a weapon against him. The stakes had just been raised from a private struggle to an all-out war, and in the cold, brutal calculus of a custody battle, every secret is unearthed, and every hidden sin is brought into the light. Donovan knew he had to protect Ilara to prove her competence to the court, but he had no idea that in digging into her past to save his future, he was about to uncover a ghost from his own. The legal machine once set in motion is a cold and relentless thing. Donovan's lawyers, the best in Atlanta, began their background check on Ilara Vance with ruthless efficiency. Their job was simple: build a file that would portray her as a competent, stable individual, a positive influence in Leo's life. The first report came back quickly, and with it a surge of relief for Donovan. As he expected, Ilara Vance was not just a waitress. The file showed a master's degree in special education from Emory University, a glowing credential that his lawyers could use to silence Victoria's accusations. Donovan felt a grim satisfaction. He had been right about her. There was something special about this woman. He felt vindicated, armed for the fight ahead. But the lawyers didn't stop there. Good lawyers never do. They kept digging, tracing her employment history backward from the Gilded Cypress. And that's when they found it. A single-line item on a 5-year-old resume, Director, Oakwood Community Center. The name meant nothing to Donovan. It was just another detail in a long file. But to the lawyers, a loose thread like this was an invitation to pull. And when they pulled, his entire world unraveled. The final report was delivered to him not in an email, but in a thick leather-bound folder. His lead attorney, a man with eyes as gray as a winter sky, placed it on his desk at 2 a.m. in his cavernous office. "There's something you need to see, Donovan," he said, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. Donovan opened the folder. The first page was Ilara's file from the community center. There were performance reviews filled with words like extraordinary, compassionate, irreplaceable. There were photographs of her surrounded by smiling children, children just like Leo. Then he saw the letters. Copies of passionate, desperate letters she had written, pleading for continued funding, detailing how the center was a lifeline for dozens of families. He felt a cold dread begin to creep up his spine. He turned the page, and then he saw it. A copy of a financial statement from his own company, Sterling Industries, dated 5 years ago. It detailed the acquisition of a plot of land for a new luxury condo development. On that statement was a list of non-essential community assets to be liquidated to maximize profitability. The first item on that list was the Oakwood Community Center. The final document was a termination notice, a cold, formulaic letter informing the center that their funding had been cut effective immediately. And at the bottom of the page, an authorized signature from his chief operating officer executed on his direct authority. The air left Donovan's lungs. The sound in the room, the quiet hum of the city below, faded to a deafening roar in his ears. He wasn't just a father who had neglected his son. He wasn't just a CEO who made tough decisions. He was the architect of Ilara Vance's professional demise. He was the man who had personally destroyed the very kind of sanctuary his own son so desperately needed. This was the ultimate cruel irony. A decision made on a spreadsheet in a distant boardroom, a tiny cut to save a fraction of a percentage point, had created a ripple that had now become a tidal wave crashing down on his own life. The impersonal had become brutally, intimately personal. He had been so focused on the monster in the courtroom, he never realized the biggest villain in this story was him. He now understood. A sin of omission can be as destructive as a sin of commission. The ghosts of decisions made in the name of profit always find their way home. And as he stared at the cold, hard proof of his own culpability, he knew the upcoming trial was no longer just about who would get custody of his son. It was about to be a verdict on his very soul. The courtroom was a sterile, silent theater designed to make people feel small, and Victoria's lawyer was a master of that stage. He paced before the witness stand, his questions like a series of sharp surgical cuts, each one designed to bleed Ilara Vance of her credibility. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "you are currently employed as a waitress, is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Ilara replied, her voice steady calm. "And you have no formal medical license, no doctorate in child psychology?" "I have a master's degree in special education," she stated simply. The lawyer waved his hand dismissively. "A master's degree you haven't used in 5 years. A degree that by your own admission led you to a job, serving food. Tell me, Miss Vance, how much does a waitress earn? Is it enough to be tempted by the generosity of a billionaire?" He was painting a picture for the judge, an uneducated gold-digging opportunist. Donovan sat at his table, his hands clenched into fists under the polished wood, a storm of guilt and rage warring within him. He wanted to leap to his feet, to scream the truth, but his lawyer's hand on his arm kept him anchored. When it was her turn to speak, Ilara didn't address the lawyer. She turned her gaze to the judge, and in doing so she spoke to everyone in that room. "Your Honor," she began, her voice quiet but resonant, "my value is not determined by my wage. The worth of a teacher, a caregiver, a nurse, it's not found on a pay stub. It's found in the moments that no one else sees. It's in the patience it takes to calm a child who is terrified by the world. It's in the skill it takes to build a bridge of trust into a mind that has been locked away." She then looked directly at Donovan, not with anger, but with a profound, heartbreaking clarity. "I didn't stop being an educator 5 years ago. I was forced out. My life's work was a center called Oakwood, a place for children just like Leo. It was a sanctuary until the building was bought, and our funding was cut by a company that deemed us a non-essential asset. That company was Sterling Industries." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Victoria's lawyer was stunned into silence. "So, when you ask me what I want," Ilara continued, her voice rising with a strength that filled the room, I don't want Mr. Sterling's money. What I want is for this court to see the real crisis. There is a void of resources for these children, a void created when compassion is sacrificed for profit. I'm not here to fight for a settlement. I'm here to fight for a solution. She then delivered the twist that no one saw coming. I ask this court to mandate the creation of a new fully funded center so that no other parent has to feel the desperation Mr. Sterling felt, and no other child has to wait for a miracle in a restaurant. She had transformed a personal attack into a public cause. She had turned a verdict on her character into a verdict on the values of an entire system. When a broken and humbled Donovan Sterling took the stand, he didn't offer a defense. He offered a confession. He looked at the judge, at his ex-wife, and at Ilara, and he validated every word she had said. He admitted his corporate negligence, his personal ignorance, and his profound regret. He took full responsibility. The lesson that day was etched into the heart of everyone present. A person's value is not their job title. It's the impact they have on others. And true expertise, the kind that can change a life, can be found in the most unexpected places. As the judge leaned forward, ready to deliver his verdict, it was clear that this was no longer a simple custody hearing. It was the beginning of an atonement. 1 year later, the Sterling Vance Foundation was not a quiet, sterile facility. It was a symphony of life. The sound of children's laughter echoed in hallways painted with bright murals. In a state-of-the-art sensory room, a little girl who had never spoken before was using a light board to create a galaxy of stars. This wasn't a place of treatment. It was a place of discovery. Donovan Sterling was on the floor, his suit and tie long forgotten, replaced by a simple polo shirt. He was building a tower of colorful blocks with a small group of children, including Leo. He moved with a practiced ease, an instinctual patience he never knew he possessed. He knew now when to be quiet, when to offer a gentle hum, when to simply be present. He was no longer a visitor in his son's world. He was a resident. We see the change not just in him, but through him. We see Leo confident and calm, notice a new child huddled in a corner overwhelmed. And we watch as Leo, using a communication device on his tablet, gently approaches the boy and shows him how to use the noise-canceling headphones. The healing he had received was now something he could give to others. The cycle was complete. The video ends in the Foundation's garden as the sun sets, painting the Atlanta sky in hues of orange and purple. Ilara is watching the children play. Donovan joins her, a comfortable silence settling between them. Leo runs up, his face bright with excitement. He's holding a drawing, a crayon picture of 3 figures standing in front of a big, colorful building. He points to the drawing, then looks up at them, his eyes shining. His voice, clear and proud, comes through his device. "We built a good house." Donovan knelt, his heart so full it ached, and pulled his son into a hug. "Yes, we did," he whispered. "We built a home." He finally understood. The greatest empires are not built of steel and glass, but of empathy, understanding, and love. That is the only architecture that truly lasts. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the power of seeing the unseen and valuing the overlooked, please take a moment to hit the like button. It tells us that are the stories that matter. Share this video with someone who might be feeling invisible today, someone who needs a reminder of their own quiet strength. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds us what it truly means to connect, to heal, and to build a better world.